I stood before the old church on the corner of Maple Street, before the early morning sun had fully touched the faded bricks on the west wall. The heavy wooden door gave a soft creak as I pushed it open, the sound echoing like a familiar greeting, old but not strange. Inside, the soft yellow light from small candles lining the long pews softened the space. No choir, no organ music, just the gentle tap of my shoes on the stone floor with each step and the quiet whisper of wind through the stained glass windows. I walked slowly, as if afraid to disturb the silence. I stopped at the third pew, where the small scratch on the wood was still visible, the one I remembered making the first time I knelt here, almost a year ago. Sitting down, I placed a small box on my lap. A square wooden box, wrapped in white linen, nothing special, except inside held a promise, old but still warm. I picked up the ring inside. Candlelight reflected off the dulled silver. It wasn't shiny like the first day I put on my finger anymore. There were a few small scratches, the tracks of time, of the nights I kept it in my pocket while sleeping on the sofa, or the times I touched it as if to remind myself I had once been a husband, a father, someone called by name with respect. The ring was never thrown away. I never intended to wear it again either. I just kept it like holding onto a piece of memory I wasn't ready to let go of. Outside, the sanctuary was being decorated for a small wedding. No expensive roses, no fancy candles, just a few sprigs of wildflowers in glass jars, wooden chairs arranged neatly, and sunlight streaming through the glass, creating a soft path of light down the aisle. I come early before anyone else arrived because I needed a little quiet. Before I gave this ring to Emma. Emma was a young woman whose eyes always held a quiet light. Not bright, but deep. I first met her at the woodshop behind the church, the place where people like me, those who had lost something in life, came to start over with rough pieces of wood. Back then, I didn't think I'd ever laugh again. I didn't think I'd become someone others came to, asking, "How do you cut the first line straight?" But Emma arrived with trembling hands and averted eyes, just like I had been months before. And in her, I saw what I had lost, hope. Now, as she was about to step into a new chapter, I wanted to give her this ring as a gift. Not because it's valuable, but because it once symbolized a promise I couldn't fully keep. And I believe, in her hands, it would start a new journey, a better one. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. An image of Lisa appeared in my mind, the woman who once called me the man of her life, and was also the first to say I had let the family down. I wasn't angry anymore. Truly, I wasn't. Just regretful. Regretful for the evenings the three of us sat eating instant noodles, laughing at silly things on TV. Regretful for the late nights I worked, seeing the house lights still on and Lisa folding clothes. Regretful for a simple time, but regret doesn't mean wanting to go back. I learned that during those long days at the woodshop, where the sound of chisels and dust motes in the sun taught me that some cracks shouldn't be mended, but cut away to start fresh. I picked up the ring, turning it gently between my fingers. The cool metal touched my skin, and for a moment, I felt like I heard an echo from the past. Like Lisa's laugh the first time we went shopping for used furniture. Like my daughter shouting when she learned to ride her bike. Like my own voice, still calling myself by a name no one uses anymore. Outside, I heard the first footsteps, soft, hesitant. Probably the person in charge of the lights, or someone checking the speakers. The wedding hadn't started, but perhaps the farewell was ready. I placed the ring back in the box, folding the linen carefully. Not like someone wrapping a gift, but like someone folding up a part of their life, setting it down gently, without regret but with respect. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel heavy anymore. It was as if giving away something that once carried so much weight had lightened me. Not because it wasn't precious anymore, but because I wasn't holding on to it just for myself anymore. I stood up, took a step back, and looked up at the cross hanging above the pulpit. The wood was old, but the candlelight below made it seem brighter than usual. I didn't pray, didn't say anything, just stood there like an ordinary man about to enter a ceremony to pass on something he once thought he could never let go of. I turned towards the side door, where the early light began to spill through like a new greeting. The faint scent of wildflowers hung in the air, And for the first time in months, my heart felt as peaceful as a piece of wood sanded smooth. No sharp edges, no roughness left. Just a surface steady enough for someone to place something new upon it. Maybe today I wouldn't say much. Just a look, a nod, and a small wooden box. That would be enough. Enough to start a new path, not for me, but for someone more deserving to begin with a decent promise. I remember clearly the first day I walked into the company. I was 32 then. My hair was still thick, clothes neatly pressed, my white shirt freshly ironed, still smelling faintly of soap at the cuffs. I had nothing but a ballpoint pen and a small notebook tucked into my breast pocket. No one greeted me. No one asked my name. I entered the building like a shadow, unnoticed, no one stopping. And honestly, I wasn't expecting anything either. I just figured if I worked hard, kept my head down and my eyes straight ahead, sooner or later, someone would notice. There would come a day when someone would give me a nod of recognition. Those first days at the company felt like walking down a long, unlit hallway. I sat alone at a small desk, tucked in a corner, right near the supply room. No window, no plants, just the whirring sound of the printer and the faint smell of new paper in the air. I wasn't assigned anything specific, just supporting the design team. They gave me rough drafts, things no one else wanted to deal with. Minor errors, faded details, parts nobody thought were important. But I did them all, carefully, slowly. No complaints, no questions. I remember one time, I stayed until almost midnight fixing a set of foundation blueprints someone else had scaled incorrectly. I didn't tell anyone. The next day, the team lead submitted it on time. The project got approved. Everyone congratulated him. No one knew I was the one who saved it. I wasn't upset either. I just quietly looked at my hands. Hands that had once farmed held shovels, built brick walls, now holding pencils and rulers. I didn't have a prestigious degree, didn't graduate from a famous university, but I had hands that knew how to work and a heart that knew how to keep a promise. And that promise started one evening, back when I was still working construction. I stood beside Lisa, my wife who was then my girlfriend, and I said, if I ever get a chance at an office job, I'll give it my all. You won't have to worry. She smiled, held my hand, and said, as long as you don't give up, I won't give up on you. I kept my word. Every day, I arrived early, made coffee for the whole office, tidied up my desk, emptied trash cans, checked supplies. I taught myself software at home, read old design books, asked for old company blueprints to review. I wasn't good at talking, didn't know how to suck up to the boss, but I knew how not to back down. Once, there was a big project, designing a warehouse for a logistics corporation. The main person in charge got sick. The project fell behind schedule. I volunteered to do the steel component details, a part no one wanted because it was time-consuming and rarely noticed. I stayed up for 3 straight nights. Just before dawn on the submission day, I brought the drawings to the manager. He was yawning heavily, eyes bloodshot from having just arrived himself. He took the stack of blueprints, said nothing but a quick thanks, and walked straight into the meeting room. A week later, his name was in the company-wide email, the man who turned the project around. My name wasn't on the list. No one mentioned me. Only Mike at the desk next to mine nudged a cup of coffee towards me and said, guess they didn't know you did the steel work. I smiled, blaming no one. Mike was the first person in the company who really talked to me. He wasn't talkative, but he was always on time. Every evening, when everyone else had gone home, it was just me and Mike sitting across from each other, each with a cold cup of coffee. Some days, we wouldn't say anything, just listening to the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the steady blow of the air conditioner. In those moments, I felt like someone was on my side, without needing to say it. Mike talked about his son learning to drive. I talked about Lisa starting to learn how to cook. Once, I showed Mike the drawings I'd spent all night correcting. He just nodded and said, solid. Keep it that way. Don't let anyone change it. I didn't know how valuable those words were until that drawing was approved by the client without a single revision. Those little things, they accumulated inside me like drops of water filling an invisible glass. I waited for the day that glass would be full. The day I'd stand on a stage, shake the boss's hand, and hear someone say, Daniel Carter, the one who made this project a success. But that glass, for 17 years, never filled up. My name only appeared in one place, the weekly work assignment sheet, posted in the stairwell corner. I remember one time I was nominated to attend a meeting with a major client. I prepared meticulously, even printed 3D mock-ups, practiced speaking in front of the mirror. But that morning, I got a text. Bryce will go instead. Need to present a younger face for the company. I nodded. No one saw me clench my fists inside my pockets. When I got home, Lisa asked, "Why haven't you been promoted after all these years?" I didn't answer. Just said, "I'm not good at talking. I'm good at working." I believed that if I kept trying, one more late night, one more person helped, eventually they would see. Eventually, I wouldn't be this shadow walking through the office hallways, but someone called by name with respect. I lived on that hope, bit by bit, every detail drawn to the right scale, every flawless design, because I believed somewhere someone was still watching. Maybe Mike, maybe Lisa, maybe God himself, maybe no one at all, but I would still do it, because I had promised that woman years ago that I wouldn't give up. And for me, a promise, once made, was something you had to keep until the very end. I don't remember the exact date, just that the sky was overcast, not raining, but heavy. Like the air itself knew something was about to happen. I arrived at the office as usual, nearly 30 minutes early, with a coffee from the old machine downstairs and a drawing I'd corrected all night tucked in a tube slung over my shoulder. Mike was already there. He always came in early on Mondays, a habit no one required. I put my coffee on the desk, gave a slight nod. He just looked at me and then silently pointed towards the elevator. The doors were still open, but what caught my attention wasn't the chime, but the person standing inside. Bryce, white shirt without a single wrinkle, hair slicked back perfectly, a black leather briefcase hanging from his left arm. He smiled, a polite half smile. I'd seen that smile on posters advertising leadership courses, the kind that says nothing but makes others feel smaller. I nodded a greeting. He nodded back, said nothing. The elevator doors closed. Mike looked at me. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. A hint of hesitation, a bit of caution. Then he just said, "The boss wants to see you." Sixth floor conference room. I didn't think much of it. Assumed it was a project progress check. I still held on to the belief that if I just kept doing things right, nothing bad would happen. The sixth floor conference room was a place I rarely set foot in. High ceilings, bright white lights, black leather chairs arranged around a long, dark wood table. Every time I entered, I always felt too small for the space. When I pushed the door open, the boss was already there. Arms crossed, eyes not meeting mine. There was a file open in front of him, but I knew it was just a prop. Nobody stares intently at papers before saying thank you. The door closed behind me, not loudly, but it felt like a sentence had just been passed. The boss cleared his throat, then began with words sickeningly familiar. "We deeply appreciate your contributions. 17 years is a long journey, but the company is evolving, needs new blood, young thinking." I said nothing. I just listened. Each word fell into my ears like a small drop of water seeping through an old crack, persistent, patient, and heavy. Then he said, "Bryce will be taking over your position starting next week." I looked straight at him. Didn't ask why. Didn't question why no one had warned me. I just looked. A look containing no anger, just looking, trying to understand. But deep down, I already knew. I'd seen the signs for a long time. I just hadn't dared to believe them. Bryce had been with the company less than a year. Graduated from school the boss had funded scholarships for. Whispers in the cafeteria suggested he was family. I once overheard someone say, "He calls him uncle." I'd laughed, thinking it was just gossip. But that day as I left the conference room, walking down the long hallway with large windows overlooking the parking lot, where my old pickup truck was still parked, I saw Bryce sitting in the reception area, phone in hand, legs crossed, relaxed. He looked at me, still wearing that polite half-smile. But this time I noticed a small detail. His hands were clenched tightly, knuckles white. Only people try hard to stay calm, clench their hands like that. I didn't say anything. I just walked past. But inside me, something fractured. When I got back to my desk, Mike was waiting. He didn't ask. Didn't need to. We understood each other well enough without words. I quietly grabbed a small cardboard box and started packing. A family photo. A steel ruler with worn edges. A set of drawings with red ink annotations. The foundation plans for the new project I corrected last night. The ones that would surely be rejected if submitted as they were. I used to think I'd stay here until retirement. Thought I'd get a small party, a plaque of appreciation. But now there was nothing. No cake, no farewells, no eyes watching me leave. Just a long hallway, a silent elevator, and my name appearing nowhere except maybe on the sidelines of an internal email noting, Daniel Carter, leaving the company due to restructuring. On the way to the parking lot, I passed the hallway where photos of outstanding employees from over the years were hung. I saw Mike's picture from 5 years ago. Saw a picture of a kid who used to be an intern I'd mentored years back. But not me. Never me. I didn't feel angry. Just empty. As if I had never really been there. As I neared my truck, Mike followed. The afternoon wind rustled through the trees, carrying the smell of asphalt and the sound of dry leaves crunching underfoot. You know, Mike said, hands in his pockets, looking towards the building, Bryce has never set foot on an actual construction site. Yesterday, the boss asked me to show him how to read foundation plans. He thought the colored lines on the drawing were for decoration. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Mike's words, just that one sentence, ignited something inside me. Not because Bryce was incompetent, but because just having the right last name allowed him to climb into my position. Mike looked at me, gently placed a hand on my shoulder, and gave a quiet nod. His eyes held nothing but regret and respect. I drove out of the lot, through the familiar gate, and in the rearview mirror I saw Bryce standing on the 6th floor, right by the window, looking down. Maybe looking at me. Maybe just admiring the view. I didn't know, but I knew from that day on, I was no longer Daniel, the company man. I was just a middle-aged, unemployed man with an old pickup truck and a heart bent out of shape by something called personnel restructuring. When I got home, I parked in the driveway. Didn't go inside right away. I sat in the truck for another 15 minutes, looking through the windshield. The sky was pale gray, no rain, but cold. Cold like the boss's eyes when he said, "Thank you for 17 years. I leaned back in the seat, closed my eyes. Images flashed through my mind. Late nights working overtime, holidays spent at the office, times I covered shifts for others. Every line drawn, every note written, every small dream that one day I would be recognized. But then that dream was crossed out, not with a shout, but with a quiet phrase, "We need new blood." I don't know what I was thinking then. Just remember that in my heart, an old promise began to crack. The promise I'd whispered to Lisa on a starlit summer night. I won't let you and our daughter want for anything. I'll be the rock of this family. I had kept that promise for 17 years, but now I wasn't sure anymore. I sighed, opened the truck door. The wind blew in, carrying the sound of falling leaves. I opened the front door like usual, the hinge giving a soft squeak, unclear if it needed oil or if I just never noticed it before. Light from outside spilled into the living room, soft and pale like ash. I stepped inside. No one came to greet me. No sound of sizzling pans. No smell of toast or late afternoon coffee. Just a silence, thick, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. Lisa sat on the sofa, holding a stack of papers. The yellow lamplight from the corner caught her hair, revealing a few silver strands I hadn't noticed before. She wore the gray sweater I'd given her last Christmas. Didn't look at me. Didn't say hello. Just turned the pages slowly, as if each number printed on them weighed as much as stone. I didn't know what to say first. I just placed the cardboard box I was carrying onto the coffee table. The sound of the bottom hitting the wood echoed, slightly hollow, the kind of sound I never wanted to hear in my own home. Inside the box was everything left after 17 years of work. A long steel ruler, a set of drawings I forgot to submit, a mug that said "World's Okayest Employee," which I'd bought myself on sale, and a photo of the 3 of us taken at the park years ago in the fall. I sat down on the chair opposite Lisa. It sagged slightly under my weight. I looked at her, waiting. She didn't speak immediately, just pushed the stack of papers aside and looked straight at me with eyes, not quite angry, but no longer familiar either. I spoke first softly. I got laid off. The words fell into the room like a small pebble dropped into a still pond. No shattering sound, just ripples. Lisa nodded slightly. She didn't ask why. Wasn't surprised. She just looked at me for a few more seconds, then turned back to the papers. I glanced down and saw they were bills electricity, water, mortgage, credit cards, a few already past due. She spoke, her voice strangely calm. You used to say that job was stable. You used to say you didn't need promotions, just security for the family. What about now, Daniel? I didn't know how to answer properly. No words were enough. I looked around the room, once the shared space for the three of us. On the bookshelf, the wooden ship model my daughter and I assembled last year still sat. On the table was a half-empty glass of milk she must have left after breakfast. On the wall hung a drawing she did in kindergarten. I remembered she tried to draw me with a bit of a belly and thinning hair, but still grinning widely. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," but my throat was dry. The words wouldn't come out. Lisa stood up, walked into the kitchen. Her footsteps sounded light, but decisive. I heard water running, then the sound of her opening a drawer. A moment later, she returned with a file folder. Placed on the table. "This is the house file. I called the bank. If we don't make payments for the next 3 months, they'll start foreclosure proceedings." She didn't say anything about how I might manage. Didn't ask what I would do next. She simply informed me. The way someone reports the weather, dry, cold, and nothing anyone can do to change it. I just sat there, motionless, my eyes fixed on the folder. My heart beat softly but constantly, like a wooden drum someone was tapping from inside my chest. Lisa turned, walked towards the stairs. But when her hand touched the banister, she paused. Her voice this time was quieter but clear. "Starting tomorrow, our daughter will stay late at school. I'll pick up extra evening shifts. And you should find work. Soon." There was no we, no together. The sentence, word by word, felt like pulling apart a severed cord. She didn't call me husband, didn't ask what I needed. She spoke as if I were a tenant in this house, someone who no longer belonged here. I didn't go up to the bedroom that night. No one told me to sleep on the sofa, but I didn't have the courage to walk up the stairs either. I pulled an old blanket from the closet, lay down on the long couch in the living room. Every time I shifted, the springs groaned like a lament. The ceiling looked different from that angle. Higher, colder. I couldn't hear Lisa anymore. No footsteps, no running water, no drawers opening. Just the wind seeping through the window cracks, making the thin curtains flutter slightly like someone breathing somewhere nearby. Very close but unseen. I turned my head to look at the photo of the three of us on the shelf. I used to think we were happy. Maybe we were. Or maybe we were just three people trying to play their parts well in a quiet scene of life. When the clock struck 11, I heard Lisa's soft footsteps on the wooden floor above my head. Each step felt like pressure on my chest. Once, then again. Each sound a question without an answer. I didn't sleep. My eyes stayed open. Not because of pain, but because of fear. Fear that if I slept, when I woke up tomorrow morning, there would be no one left in the house. The next morning, light filtering through the curtain gap made me squint. No smell of coffee. No sound of Lisa asking our daughter if she'd eaten breakfast. Nothing. Just a piece of paper on the kitchen table, placed right next to the cardboard box I'd brought home from the company yesterday. I walked closer. Daughter eating at school. I went to work early. No, have a good day. No exclamation point. No name. I picked up the paper, looked at it as if it were a suicide note. Then I folded it carefully, as if afraid to wrinkle something sacred. I placed it next to the family photo on the shelf. Two pieces of memory. One was what used to be. One wasn't certain anymore. I opened my laptop, typed the words, "Manual labor jobs, no degree required." The keyboard clicked. The sound was clearer than ever in the silent house. And when I hit enter, I knew a part of me had died. Not because I was fired, not because I lost money, but because I lost my place in the very house I had built with my own hands and promises. That night, after a silent dinner and an hour sitting by the window watching the streetlights cast shadows on the house wall, I stood up, put on my jacket, and went out. I didn't tell Lisa. She was folding laundry in the bedroom, didn't look up as I passed the doorway, didn't ask where I was going, didn't wish me a safe return. She just continued her task as if I were part of the background noise, existing but not requiring attention. The night air carried the faint smell of burnt grease from roadside diners, mixed with the scent of tree sap and damp earth after the afternoon rain. I got in the truck, started the engine, unsure where I was headed. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house another minute. I drove slowly through familiar streets, past the old bookstore where I used to take my daughter every weekend, past the church where we celebrated our first Christmas after moving to this town, past the building where I used to work, now dark, black as a wiped-clean memory. Finally, I stopped in front of a small bar on a corner where a red neon sign blinked open intermittently, like an invitation both friendly and dangerous. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been in a bar. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe longer. The wooden door opened with a creak like old bones being twisted too far. The air inside was thick with the smell of cigarettes, spilled beer, and something nameless. Weariness, perhaps. I chose a corner booth at the back, where the overhead light didn't reach too clearly, where I could see everyone without being noticed. The bartender handed me a menu. I just shook my head and said, "A cold beer." I sat there, watching the bubbles rise and pop in the glass. Part of me wanted to drain it just to forget. Another part was afraid that if I finished it, I'd lose control. Just then, the chair next to me scraped. Someone had pulled it out. I didn't turn around immediately, but the voice that sounded beside my ear sent a chill down my spine. Daniel Carter. Same as always, quiet in a crowd. I turned. It was Greg. I hadn't seen Greg in over 10 years. Back then, he'd also worked at my company. But Greg didn't last long. He had talent, but his personality was too strong, didn't like conforming. Eventually, he quit, disappearing from the company newsletter like someone who never existed. Greg looked different today. Hair cut short, neatly styled. Leather jacket, dark tie. He looked like he'd just stepped out of an important meeting. Not on a construction site, but in one of those rooms with frosted glass doors where decisions are made over drinks. He placed a file folder on the table, pushing it towards me. I looked at it like an open trap. "I heard about what happened to you. It's a damn shame. You deserved much better." I didn't reply. Greg always knew how to start with sympathy, but I knew what he really wanted was inside that folder. "There's a project. Sensitive. A bit unofficial," Greg said, his voice even like reading a report. "I need someone experienced. Someone who knows how to handle the details others miss. Someone like you." I opened the folder, skimmed through it. Warehouse design project. But the client's name was redacted. And I recognized some drawings that were strangely similar to a project I'd worked on at my old company. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my voice low. Greg just smiled. "We've both been there. You know what I know? I don't ask about origins. I just need someone to finalize the design, sign off, and put their name on the contract. All your debts could disappear within 30 days. I closed the folder. My hand trembled slightly, not out of fear, but because I was being pulled towards a deep hole. Very deep, and part of me felt relieved at the thought of falling in. I thought about the dark house, thought about Lisa's eyes, thought about the refrigerator with 3 cans of milk, a loaf of bread, and a budget sheet with the word emergency crossed out in red ink. Greg pulled out a pen. "Just sign. Nobody has to know. And you'll be the stable man your family needs again." I didn't answer, but I picked up my beer, brought it to my lips. And just then, in the reflection of the window behind the bar, I saw an image behind me. A small object, swaying slightly in the air-conditioning breeze. A silver cross, hanging from the rearview mirror of my truck. That old cross was an 18th birthday gift from my mother. I'd taken it down sometimes, put away, but never thrown it out. Never dared to. I set the beer down, gently, as if putting it down any harder would shatter the promise within me. Greg tilted his head. "What's wrong?" I stood up, took the folder, closed it, placed it back where it was. "I'm not selling my soul for fake stability." Greg said nothing. He just watched me, his eyes cold and deep, as if assessing whether I truly dared to walk away. I turned and left, stepping out of the bar into the night wind, which now seemed lighter, no longer cutting like before. I looked toward my truck. The silver cross still swayed, silently. But I understood. Some silences echo louder than screams. I got in the truck, closed the door, didn't turn on the radio, didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, breathing evenly. Inside, I heard my mother's voice, like when I was little. "Daniel, you can't control the wind, but you can choose where to anchor your boat." I had chosen. I wouldn't be the one holding the wheel, steering the wrong way just to avoid a storm. I'd rather stand in the wind, but not turn my back on myself. And in that silence, I felt peace. I couldn't sleep. The house at 3 in the morning was eerily quiet. No usual hum of the air conditioner. No sound of Lisa turning over in the bedroom. No gentle creak of wood under the floorboards as the night wind slipped through. Only the tick of the second hand on the wall clock, moving in small steps as if counting down the time for someone whose hope was running out. I sat up straight on the worn-out sofa, pulling the blanket off. Dim light from the street lamp filtered through the gap in the curtains, casting thin, gray, wavering streaks on the wall, looking like lines of writing never finished. I put on my jacket, walked out the door. Without thinking, without planning, just following something inside me that urged me forward. The streets were deserted at night. The streetlights glowed weakly, as if about to go out, but still trying to stay alive until dawn. I walked. It was cold, but not biting. Just a dull chill that seeped between my fingers, between the layers of my clothes, reminding me of my days as a construction worker. Those freezing mornings huddled by a bucket of cement, breathing hard without a word of complaint. I walked past the town square, past the silent rows of houses, past the bakery that used to sell the cinnamon rolls my daughter loved most. Everything was still there. Only now I felt like an outsider. Everything familiar yet distant. Finally, I stopped in front of the small church at the end of Maple Street. The gray stone building stood silent in the light fog. No one around. No biz. No lights. Just an old church, quiet as if deep asleep. I walked up the cold stone steps. The door wasn't locked. The wood gave a soft creak as I pushed it open. That sound, in the middle of the night, echoed so clearly I felt like I was doing something sacred. Inside, the darkness wasn't complete. A few small candles still burned on the main altar. Their light flickered gently, creating dancing shadows on the long pews. The smell of wax, old wood, and dampness reminded me of the past, when I used to go to Mass with my mother. She always sat in the third pew, her hand resting on my thigh, gentle but firm enough to keep me from fidgeting. I walked forward, slowly, then sat down in the very same third pew. My hands rested on my knees, palms up, as if waiting for something, an answer, a sign, or at least a reason not to fall apart. I didn't pray, not out loud. I just looked up at the wooden cross hanging above the altar, the candlelight below reflecting off it, making it seem to glow. Not brightly, just enough to see. I sighed, a breath not of tiredness, but of holding it in for too long. I thought about everything. 17 years. A wife who now saw me as a burden. A daughter growing distant like the moon receding from the night sea. A home that could be lost at any moment. And myself, sitting here in a sacred space, yet feeling small and lost. I whispered, not loudly, as if talking to myself. I have nothing left, but if you're listening, please keep me from losing myself. I didn't expect thunder. Didn't expect the doors to swing open or a voice to boom from above. I just wanted someone to know I was still trying. A small sound echoed from behind, soft like fabric brushing against a pew. I turned around. It was Pastor James. He wasn't surprised to see me. Just walked closer, then sat down beside me. Didn't ask why. Didn't stare. Just placed a hand on my shoulder gently, the way my mother used to when I was sad. We sat in silence for a long time. Only the crackling sound of the candles burning and the night wind whispering through the wooden door cracks like a very old choir. Finally, James spoke. His voice was deep, unhurried. God answers in silence, Daniel. You just have to listen. I nodded slightly, not looking at him, my eyes still fixed on the cross. James shared that he too had once lost everything. Wife, home, reputation. Had thought there was nothing left to believe in. But then, in the middle of the night, he came here, just like me now, and he received no answers. Only one thing kept him going, the belief that if he could still hold onto his soul, there would still be a path forward. Not everyone sees the bright light, Daniel, he said. But those who are willing to sit in the darkness long enough, they start to see. I said nothing, but tears fell, not noisily, not suddenly, just drop by drop, slowly, as if my soul was releasing itself from a long seizure. James didn't wipe my tears. He just sat beside me, his hand still on my shoulder, steady as rock. We sat like that for a very long time, until the candles burned low, until I felt the night wind wasn't biting anymore, until I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. I stood up, thanked him. He just nodded, then walked towards the door ahead of me. On the way back, I didn't turn on my truck's headlights. Just let the street lights guide me. The road was the same, but I wasn't. I got home before dawn. Still the same old house. Still the photo on the shelf. But for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel cold anymore. I looked at the silver cross hanging quietly from the rearview mirror. And for the first time in a very long time, I managed a faint smile. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, I had held on to myself. I started the day with the smell of wood. Not expensive cologne, not ready-made coffee from an automatic machine. Just a real smell of wood, slightly sweet, warm, a bit dusty, a hint of sweat, and full of life. The smell of something still being created, unfinished but real. The wood shop was behind the church, near the edge of town. A simple building with a corrugated metal roof, no sign, no nameplate. Just an old wooden door with a lock that was always open during the day, and a small chalkboard sign written in white chalk. We don't need resumes. Just two willing hands. I remember the first morning I walked in. Sunlight slanted through the dusty window panes, illuminating the wood dust particles floating in the air like quiet, drifting specks of light. The buzz of a saw came from a corner of the shop, the steady rhythm of a hammer tapping, the dry but warm sound of wood hitting wood. No one asked my name. No one asked what I used to be. An old man with a long white beard, wearing dark safety glasses, looked me up and down, then handed me a piece of pine and a chisel. "Start here," he said. "Doesn't have to be pretty. Just don't break it." I sat down on a rickety wooden stool in the corner. Holding the chisel, I felt like a child holding a pen for the first time. Wood wasn't like blueprints. No red and blue lines to follow. No undo command. Every touch was permanent. Every mistake a lesson. I started slow. My hands were stiff. My shoulders ached. But my heart gradually calmed down. For the first 3 days, I didn't talk to anyone. Everyone was busy with their own work. Each person in the shop had their own reason for being there. Someone who'd been in prison, someone divorced, someone recovering from addiction, and me, someone the world had left behind. On the 4th day, I heard a loud noise behind me. A tray of tools fell to the floor. The clang of metal on concrete echoed harshly, like a wrong note in an already somber piece of music. I turned around. A young woman, dark shoulder-length hair, thin frame, was bending down, picking up each item. Her hands trembled so much she could barely hold the hammer. People looked, then turned away. No one helped, not out of indifference. Just here, everyone had had to pick themselves up at some point. I walked over, said nothing, just bent down, picked up a ruler, and handed it to her. "Be careful with this one," I said softly. "It slips the easiest." She looked up. Her eyes were slightly swollen, dark circles underneath. But in those eyes, I saw something very familiar, a fear of being seen too clearly. "I'm Emma," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm Daniel." From that day on, we weren't exactly friends, but there was a comfortable silence when we worked near each other. No need for much talk. Just watching each other's hands work was enough to understand how hard the other was trying. Emma rarely spoke about her past. I didn't ask, only knew she'd dropped out of school. Once I saw her sitting alone during break, staring intently at a wooden plank, as if trying to find the meaning of life in its grain. I gave her a small piece of what I'd kept, an oddly shaped scrap, but one side I'd sanded very smooth. "This was thrown away," I said, "but I kept it because I thought, if it couldn't be what it was originally, maybe it could become something else." Emma took it, said nothing. But the next day, she came back. Then a week passed. She started asking me how to read the curve of the wood grain. Asked why I chose to use a chisel instead of sander. Asked how to cut a square corner when your eyes didn't trust your hands. I answered, not elaborately, just what I had learned from construction sites, from cold, rainy days, from mistakes I couldn't erase. Once, I told her about the first blueprint I made that no one remembered. I said what saddened me most wasn't being forgotten, but that I used to think it didn't matter. Emma looked at me. "And what do you think now?" I smiled faintly. "I think what matters is that you don't forget yourself." She nodded, didn't smile, but her eyes softened. One afternoon, it rained lightly. The sound of rain on the metal roof was like a steady heartbeat. Emma stood looking at an unfinished chair, then suddenly said, her voice sharp, "I can't do this. I don't deserve to be here. I used to be a thief. I keep it." Everyone in the shop fell silent. Wind blowing through the door ruffled her hair. She turned away, almost throwing the chisel onto the table. I didn't stop her. I just pulled out another piece of wood. One I had cut wrong, surface uneven, grain crooked. I said, "See this chair leg? It was discarded, but I kept it. I didn't fix it to be perfect. I just trimmed it a bit, sanded it a bit. Now it can stand." I gently touched the wood surface. Its value isn't in being cut wrong. It's that it can still stand. Emma was silent for a long time. Then she turned back, sat down, and continued working. That evening, she was the last one to leave the shop. 3 weeks later, she finished her first chair, painted it herself, sanded it herself. She named it Second Chance. The chair wasn't perfect, but it was sturdy and beautiful in its own way. She donated it to the church. Underneath the leg, I found a small card, written in trembling handwriting. "Thank you, Daniel. Not for the technique, but because you believed I was worth starting over." I didn't reply. I just folded the card, put it in the drawer next to the silver cross my mother had given me. Two things I held on to when life fell apart. The next day, Emma walked into the shop with a small smile on her lips. For the first time, she asked me proactively, "What are we making today?" I handed her a new piece of wood. "A table," I said, "so people can sit together." And as she started measuring, I took a step back, watched, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive again. Not because anyone knew my name, but because I had managed to pass on something I had lost to someone who could cherish it better than I could. I had just locked up the workshop when my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was already dusk, the remaining light just enough to make the asphalt shimmer like a river nearing nightfall. A cold wind swept across the yard, filled with the smell of wood and sawdust, blowing a few papers off a table. I didn't rush to pick them up, because the name displayed on the screen made me freeze for a few seconds. Mike. The last time I heard his voice was over 2 months ago. After the farewell I called as quiet as a closing door. Since then, just a few polite text messages. Not a single call. I answered. Mike's voice came through small, low, and tense, as if he were somewhere he shouldn't be overheard. "They mentioned you this morning." In the meeting, I didn't respond. Just heard the wind blowing through the receiver. Maybe real wind. Maybe the silence Mike didn't know where to place. "Not to honor you," he continued, his voice dropping, "but to beg." It took a while before he told me the whole story. Bryce, that name no longer unfamiliar, had ruined a major contract. He rushed the schedule without listening to the technical department's warnings. A design flaw in the foundation wasn't double-checked. A main wall section collapsed right after the construction crew left. No one was hurt, thank God. But the estimated damage was over 10 million. I didn't feel smug. Didn't feel pain either. I just sat down on the wooden step in front of the workshop door, watching the evening shadows crawl down the metal roof. Mike said, "The client specifically requested you. Otherwise, they'll cancel the contract permanently." I understood what that meant. It was the strange power of a quiet reputation. 17 years I worked without anyone knowing my name. Now remembered, not with praise, but as the last hope of those who had turned their backs. I didn't answer right away. I just said, "Do you think I should go?" Mike was silent. Then he said, very softly, "Just one word from you. Then I'll arrange it." The next morning, I put on an old gray shirt, wore the leather shoes with cracked heels, and left the house early. Lisa was still asleep. Our daughter had left at 6. I drove towards the old building. Every street, every turn was so familiar I could navigate with my eyes closed. But my heart felt strange. I was no longer the man who went there to earn a living, but the man who had been pushed out the door like a broken chair, and now called back because no one else had a chair left to sit on. I walked into the lobby. Still the faint smell of disinfectant, the smell of printer paper, the sound of high heels clicking on the white tile floor. The only difference was no one recognized me. Mike waited for me at the elevator. He said nothing, but his nod told me today was not like the old days. The 6th-floor conference room, where I had once received my dismissal without a word of thanks, was the same. But today, there weren't enough people to fill the chairs. Maybe because no one wanted to witness a moment of reversal. Bryce stood in the corner, face pale, hands clasped tightly, avoiding eye contact. The boss sat at the head of the table, no longer with crossed arms like last time. He leaned towards me as I sat down. His voice was softer, gentler, even a little pleading. Daniel, we were wrong. But now, you're the only one who can save this project. I didn't answer quickly. I looked around, the place where there had never been a single picture of me. The place where I had once dreamed of hearing a word of recognition. And then I spoke, my voice slow, clear, not high, not low, as if just rereading a memory that had once been too painful to say aloud. I was here for 17 years. I never asked for anything more than to do my job well. I didn't ask for praise, didn't ask for promotions. I just wanted respect. And you forgot that. The room was dead silent. I looked straight at the boss, without anger, without bitterness. Just the look of someone who finally understood the rules of the game and knew he was no longer a pawn. I'm not coming back. Not for money. Not for reputation. Because I'm no longer the person you can call when you need something and forget when you're done. I stood up, looked at Bryce one last time. He lowered his head, didn't speak, didn't apologize. Mike walked me to the elevator. Before the doors closed, he asked, "Are you sure?" I nodded. And for the first time in a long time, I said something I hadn't expected I could say so gently. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back. Sometimes forgiveness is leaving without carrying the bitterness. Mike smiled, sadly but understandingly. I left the building. The sun was out now. It was warm, a light breeze, an ordinary day. But for me, it was a very real day. Not because I was chosen, but because I had chosen not to belong to the place that had made me forget my own worth. I went back to the woodshop. Emma was painting a long table. She saw me, looked up and asked, "Where did you go?" I smiled, pulled up a stool, and sat down beside her. I just went back to make sure I didn't belong there anymore. She smiled, softly but deeply. That afternoon, the sound of sawing echoed steadily in the shop. The smell of fresh wood filled the air, and my heart, for the first time, had no questions left. That day, I woke up earlier than usual. It wasn't quite light yet. The air in the house was still sleepy, a coolness lingering on the bare tiles underfoot. I walked into the kitchen, made coffee, listening to the faint dripping sound from the old machine I kept meaning to replace, but never did. The aroma spread slowly like a greeting that didn't need to be loud. I didn't drink it right away. Just poured it into a mug, left it there, and walked towards a nightstand drawer in the old bedroom. I opened the drawer, slowly, like turning a page in an old book, where all memories are pressed flat, but never completely dry. Inside, in a small square wooden box wrapped in worn, soft fabric, was my wedding ring. I hadn't worn it in a very long time. The last time I took it off was that winter night last year, after Lisa said she no longer saw me as her partner. I didn't throw it away, didn't pawn it. I just folded it away, like folding up an unfinished promise. Today, I brought it with me. I wrapped the ring in a simple piece of white linen, no ribbon, no fancy wrapping paper. Just a small gift, so light no one would guess it once weighed as much as a piece of my heart. It was still dim when I left the house. Early morning mist lay lightly on the road like a thin layer of smoke. I rode my bike from the workshop towards the church, the small box resting quietly in my jacket pocket, unmoving, but my heart beat a little slower. Today was Emma's wedding. The ceremony took place in the small church at the end of Maple Street, the place where I had sat one night months ago, praying for God to keep me from losing myself. That day, I came alone. Today, I also came alone. But inside me, a new person was standing firm. The church was more crowded than I expected. People I'd met at the workshop, even some I'd never spoken to. Some came because they cared for Emma, others perhaps out of curiosity. But I came for something very different. I chose the third pew, my usual spot. Morning light streamed through the stained glass, creating shimmering patterns of blue and red on the wooden floor. The scent of candle wax mixed with the smell of raw wood and yellow chrysanthemums. It all made the place feel both sacred and warm, like an invisible embrace. When Emma walked in, everyone stood up. She wore a simple white dress, no frills, no elaborate lace. Her hair was tied back loosely. She held no flowers, just an old Bible she used to carry every Sunday afternoon. Her face wasn't radiant like in movie weddings, but there was a quiet, mature stillness, as if she was stepping into something she knew she would keep, rather than still searching for. The groom stood at the other end, a young, quiet man who had come to the workshop a few times to pick Emma up after hours. He didn't say much, but his hand always held hers tightly. As if, without words, he would stay. When Pastor James invited close friends and family to speak, a few people stood up before me. They talked about Emma, who had stumbled, lost her way, but then stood up, learned to hold a knife steady, and keep her promises true. I hadn't planned to stand up, but Emma looked at me from the middle of the aisle. She gave a slight nod, just a gentle nod, but it was enough. I walked up, my hand still clutching the small box in my pocket. Standing at the wooden lectern, I didn't read a speech, didn't open any notes. I just looked at everyone, then at Emma. I don't have many words about love, no fairy tale to share, but I have a small object and an old story. I took the box from my pocket, opened it. Light from the window shone on the ring's surface, no longer shiny like before, but still whole. This ring was once my promise to someone. We walked a path together for a while. Then we lost each other. I kept it, not because I hoped she would come back, but because I wanted to believe that a promise, even if there's no one left to keep it with, should still be cherished. I turned to Emma, held the box out to her. But today, I think it's time to pass it on. Not for anyone to remember the past, but for someone to start a future. You learn something it took me a lifetime to understand. Value isn't about who you used to be, but how you choose to love after knowing love can break. Emma stepped forward, took the ring, said nothing, but tears fell. Real tears, unconcealed, not from sadness, but because something had been touched deeper than memory. She hugged me, tightly, not a polite hug, but the hug of someone who once thought she wasn't worthy, and then realized someone had trusted her enough to give her the most precious thing they had ever kept. After the ceremony, everyone gathered in the churchyard. The willow tree by the road swayed in the gentle breeze. Laughter echoed from every corner. Cake was cut, tea was poured, but I sat quietly on a corner step, holding a glass of water, watching Emma stand among the crowd. No longer shy, no longer avoiding anyone's gaze. She glowed without needing a halo. Mike walked over, sat beside me. He handed me a can of soda, opened it with a crisp pop. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. He looked at the empty box in my hand. "That ring, how long did you keep it?" I looked at him, then towards the sunlight filtering through the trees. Just long enough to know it was time to let it go. He didn't say more. We sat there, in the most peaceful silence two middle-aged men had ever known. No need for philosophy. No need for conclusions. Just watching a new generation begin their journey, while our own hearts felt a little lighter. Evening approached. People started leaving. I went back to the workshop, hung my jacket on the hook, sat down on my workbench. The faint circular impression of the old ring was still visible in the thin fabric lining my pocket, like the trace of a promise passed on. And now, I thought I was ready to write a new promise. Not to anyone else, but to myself. That morning, I woke early, not to an alarm, not out of habit, but because the first light of day streamed through the gap in the curtains, touching my eyelids like a whisper. The light wasn't harsh, not rushed. It spread through the room like an invitation to live another day, not to try harder than anyone else, just to continue. I stepped out onto the porch. The March air was cool. The smell of yesterday's freshly cut grass still lingered faintly on the wind. The willow leaves in the yard swayed gently, falling one by one as if they too understood that today required no noise. I sat down on the wooden step, holding a freshly brewed cup of coffee. No sugar, no milk, just a familiar bitterness, not easy to drink, but real. I looked out at the small road in front of the house. A few kids rode by on bikes. A neighbor walked their dog. Everything was the same. No one knew that yesterday I had given away the ring that carried a whole chapter of my life. Nor did anyone know that this morning my heart felt a little lighter. Lighter in a way that couldn't be measured by weight, only felt through peace. I went back inside, opened the drawer of my desk. Inside was a letter. No envelope, no sender's name. But the handwriting was so familiar I couldn't mistake it. It was from Lisa. I didn't know when she put it there. Maybe when I was out. Maybe one morning when I left earlier than usual. I sat down, opened it. Inside were a few lines, short but heavier than anything she had ever said out loud. "I used to blame you too much. Used to think you only knew how to endure without doing anything to change things. But now I understand. Living for reputation is easier than living for what's right. I don't know what we have left. I don't expect you to forgive me either. But I hope our daughter grows up to be like you, living for what's right, not what's easy. I folded the letter, placed it beside Emma's card, the one I'd kept since the wedding. Two pieces of paper, two women, two parts of my life. Neither alike, but both had seen me at my most vulnerable, and then left me something like a quiet farewell. I didn't write back. It wasn't necessary. Some apologies, some thanks, just need to be read, not necessarily answered. In the afternoon, I returned to the workshop. The wooden door creaked softly as I pushed it open. Inside, the sounds of sawing, planing wood, quiet laughter. I took a breath, the smell of sawdust, sweat, the scent of things imperfect but honest, filling my lungs. Emma was sitting, carving a chair leg. Her face was focused, hair tied back neatly, the slanted sunlight through the window illuminating her hands, making each movement look like a ritual. I walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up, smiled, asked nothing. No need to ask. I sat down beside her, picked up a fresh piece of wood, began sketching the first lines for a picture frame. Not to hang, but a place on a table. Inside would be the photo taken at the wedding. Me, Emma, Mike, and the others. All those who once thought they were lost, but then found each other in the sound of wood against wood. As dusk began to fall, everyone left the workshop. I was the last one to lock the door. I stood for a moment on the steps. The smell of wood still clung to my hands. I took a breath, then walked towards the church at the end of Maple Street. No service. No one there. The door was slightly ajar as always. I pushed it open, walked up to the third pew. There, I had once knelt in the dark night, amidst loss and amidst unanswered questions. Now I sat down, not to ask anything, just to give thanks for not having lost myself when everything else fell apart. I looked up at the wooden cross hanging high above. A final ray of sunlight slanted through a stained glass window, casting a small halo of light upon it. Not large, but enough. I closed my eyes, asked for nothing, needed no miracles. I just whispered a sentence, softer than a breath. I didn't keep the ring for myself anymore. Now I just want to keep me. I opened my eyes. Outside, the wind blew through the trees. The leaves rustled against each other, making a sound as soft as an old person rereading the last page of a book. I stood up, left the church, walked back towards the workshop. The small path led through a grassy field. The sun had set, but the sky was still bright, a delicate, gentle brightness, like the way you know you're no longer left behind. I returned home as the streetlights came on. Opened the door, hung on my jacket, walked towards the desk. The drawer was still where I kept things no one needed to know about. I opened it, took out Emma's card and Lisa's letter, placed them on the desk, then took a blank sheet of paper, wrote a few short lines. If one day our daughter reads this, Dad just wants you to know, you don't have to be the best, the richest, or the most famous. You just need to be the last one standing when everything around you demands you fall. And if you can hold onto your heart, then you're already much more than I ever was. I folded the paper, placed it with the other two items, gently closed the drawer. Then I went out onto the porch, sat down on the step, holding a mug of hot tea. The night breeze blew softly. The scent of jasmine from the backyard drifted into the air. The sky was full of stars, each star a tiny point of light, yet enough to make you look up. I closed my eyes, leaned back against the wooden post, waiting for nothing, regretting nothing. I just sat in silence and knew that I had walked through the darkness, not to shout, but to whisper to the light. I'm still here.